أفلا يتدبرون القرآن أم على قلوب أقفالها
قتل أصحاب الأخدود النار ذات الوقود إذ هم عليها قعود وهم على ما يفعلون بالمؤمنين شهود وما نقموا منهم إلا أن يؤمنوا بالله العزيز الحميد الذي له ملك السماوات والأرض والله على كل شيء شهيد إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق إن الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار ذلك الفوز الكبير
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. This is our second lesson of the Tafseer of Surah al-Buruj. Before we begin, last week we were looking at the story of the boy and the king, as it's famously known as. And one further reflection that came to mind about this story. If we look at the story, the people that were killed were of three types. We had the young boy, we had the scholar, and we had the general layman, or the general people. There was also the person who was close to the king, that also was killed as shaheed. But the three, you can say, major figures, you can say, or categories of people amongst the believers, it was these three people. So the monk, the boy, and the general layman. And they all represent three important types of people within the Muslim community. So you have the rahib, the monk, who represents the scholars and the worshippers. You have the young boy, who represents the shabab, the youth of this Muslim ummah, those who are the main movers, you can say, of an Islamic movement. And then you have the general laymen that make up the main population of the Muslim community. And they all played their own individual role. They played their own distinct role. So the rahib, the monk, his role was to educate the people. And he was we couldn't really say he was the mover, the movers and shakers we have in society. He was sitting there quietly teaching and passing on this, sacred knowledge to other people. It was the young boy who essentially was pivotal in this story, and he was the one who took on this message to the rest of the society. And he stood out as a shining example for everyone. And then you have the layman who followed the example of the young boy. Now, this doesn't mean, I don't want us to take us from this, that this means therefore that the scholars are just meant to sit there and just teach all day and not get involved in politics and society, and it's only the youth that just move and shout and scream and that's not what I'm trying to say here. What I'm trying to say here is that everyone has major roles that they need to fulfill. That doesn't mean that therefore they exclude themselves from certain activities. So the scholar, obviously, he has to go out and join the good, forbid the evil, like the young boy did, but his major role was really passing on and preserving sacred knowledge. And that's why we find, whether it's in the time of the Sahaba or the generations that came after, the major movers of society were always the youth. But there were always people in the background that were guiding them. Now, that's how things generally work out. But obviously, it could be a situation where you have figures, scholars, people of knowledge that also are engaged on the front line of da'wah. And that is really nur upon nur, that is light upon light. And so we have figures that, like the likes of Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal in contemporary age, the likes of Hassan al-Banna and Sayyid Qutb, and people who really went out and didn't just sit there with their books, but they went out with their da'wah and with their knowledge, although maybe they weren't really considered Islamic scholars, but maybe more of thinkers and revivalists. But they set an example. They really set an example for that. When it comes to knowledge, we don't just keep it to ourselves, but we pass it on to others, and we engage with the society at large. So, and as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, everyone, كُلٌّ يَعْمَلٌ عَلَى شَاكِلَتِهِ, that everyone, works according to his type. This is an ayah in Surah al-Isra. Everyone works according to his shakila, and shakila means what is suitable for him. Okay, and so not everyone could be, for example, an expert in engaging with Christians. And not everyone could be an expert when it comes to teaching Islamic knowledge, and not everyone could be an expert when it comes to giving da'wah. Everyone has their own sort of special qualities that they need to focus on and home in on, and try and excel in that. Okay, so we move on now, inshallah. So the next ayah, so we looked at the ayahs, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ النَّارِ ذَاتِ الْوَقُودِ. So cursed be or damned were the makers or the owners of the ditch, which had a fire, that al-waqud, which was full with fuel. So the nature of this ditch is that it was full of fire, and that's why obviously they were burnt alive, the Muslims. Verse number 6, إِذْهُمْ عَلَيْهَا قُعُودٌ. When they sat by it, إِذْهُمْ, when they were qu'ud, they were sitting by this fire. Now, who is they in this ayah? إِذْهُمْ عَلَيْهَا قُعُودٌ. Who does the hum refer to? Now, there's difference of opinion. Some scholars were of the view that it's referring to the people of the ditch, meaning the people who lit the ditch, i.e. the disbelievers, the kuffar. So meaning that the people of the ditch, they were surrounding and sitting around the sides of the ditch. Now there's a few problems here. Firstly, if that was the case, why is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala used the word alayha, upon? إِذْ هُمْ عَلَيْهَا قُعُودٌ, which literally means what? They were upon the fire, they were upon the ditches, they were upon the ditch itself. So some scholars were of the view that the reason why the word alayha was used was in order to emphasize the fact that the fire was so large that eventually they caught fire. Meaning they lit this fire in order to burn the believers, but because it was such a huge and enormous fire, they got caught fire as well. That's how large this fire was. It just went out of control and it ended up burning them. That's how large it was. That's one way of that some scholars looked at it. Others said, from a linguistic perspective, ala sometimes could be used to refer to being close to. So in any case, we can say that they were either very close to the fire, or they ended up being burned by themselves by the fire itself. Now, what's the significance of mentioning this? That they were by the fire. So this obviously excludes what? This excludes that they simply summoned for this ditch to be burnt, and then they just, sent for the people to be burnt. This is what happens nowadays. Recently there was a story which only came out, I think, a few days ago. I'll be referring back to this story later. There was a sheikh that was released from prison recently after spending 15 years in prison in Egypt, because he, by chance, came into contact with Hosni Mubarak, the previous president, in Medina, in the Prophet's mosque. And so he was shocked to see him there. So he had nothing planned, so he went up to him and he just said to him 2 words: Ittaqillah, fear Allah. So his bodyguards came, they grabbed him, took him back to the airport, deported him back to Egypt, and he was in prison for 15 years. Okay, and he was, obviously subject to torture and all sorts of abuse. Now, Hosni Mubarak, was he sitting there looking at the prison, watching from outside the prison cell, watching him being tortured and abused? No, he just simply commanded it. Now, here though, this is a level which is a bit worse than that. The king, he summoned that these ditches be put on fire, but he also watched these people being burnt to death. So this ayah is used to indicate the heinous nature of this crime. He didn't just order for them to be tortured and killed and to be burnt alive, but he wanted to see it with his own eyes. He was finding enjoyment in watching people being burnt to death, which shows you how sick-minded this individual was. And this is what happens sometimes when you take control of power and you abuse your power and authority, you end up sometimes taking stances like that. Other scholars were of the view that idhum alayha qu'ud actually refers to the believers. That they were on the fire due to the fact that the word ala was used. Idhum alayha qu'ud, that they were sitting on the fire. But majority seem to be of the view that no, it refers to the disbelievers and not the believers. Now, just before we move on, Ibn al-Arabi, the famous Maliki jurist and faqih and mufassir, he was of the view that the meaning of this verse, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, the implications of this is that it was abrogated. Now, what does it mean? How can this verse be abrogated? Obviously, this ayah, when we say قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, this implies praise for the believers, isn't it? So damned be those owners of that ditch, they put it on fire, they tortured the believers. This implies what? Therefore the believers were in the right position. Now Ibn al-Arabi was the view that no, this ayah has been abrogated, and that essentially when a person is in a position like that, he's in a situation of coercion. And in a situation of coercion, what are you allowed to do? Utter statements of kufr. This was the view of Ibn al-Arabi. But another Maliki jurist and faqih and mufassir as well, who was the other famous Maliki jurist and mufassir who wrote a tafsir of Quran? Al-Qurtubi. No. So Ibn al-Qurtubi, he rejected this scholar of the same madhab, his view, and he said no, we can't say this ayah is abrogated, قُتِلَ أَصْحَابُ الْأُخْدُودِ, because he said الصبر على ذلك لمن قويت نفسه. He said that to have sabr and to say the word of truth, it's permissible for the one who is strong and is able to deal with it. وَصَلَبَ دِينُهُ, and his religion, his deen is strong. ذَلِكَ أَوْلَى, that is better for him. But if he is not capable of dealing with that and he's not able to speak the word of truth, then he has the the right to utter the statement of kufr because it's a matter of coercion. And he quoted as a proof for that the Prophet said, "Inna min a'zam al-jihad kalimatu adlin 'inda sultanin ja'i." That from the greatest forms of jihad is to say the word of truth or of justice in front of a unjust ruler. And it's reported at Tirmidhi and other books of hadith. Okay. The next ayah, وَهُمْ عَلَى مَا يَفْعَلُونَ بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ شُهُودٌ. And they are witnessing, or they are seeing, whilst they were seeing what they were doing to the believers. And this ayah, maybe we can say, it proves that maybe the previous ayah is referring to the disbelievers. So this is in essence reiterating the previous statement or the previous point, or the point for the previous ayah, which was, why were they just sitting around? They were sitting around just to watch it and to essentially take enjoyment in watching these believers being killed. So they find no shame in what they were doing. Notice here how the word shuhud has been used. So I remember the beginning of the ayah, beginning of the surah speaks a lot about this idea of witnessing and seeing. وَشَاهِدٍ وَمَشْهُودٍ. So now they are the ones who are witnessing. So remember we said this is a key theme within this surah. So they are the ones that are witnessing. What are they witnessing? The believers being burnt alive. The next ayah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ. And they did not naqamu, which means they did not have any resentment. They didn't have any, or ill treat the believers. They didn't hate them or treat them in an ill way, except the fact that they believed in Allah Al-Aziz Al-Hamid, the Almighty, and the one who is praiseworthy, the one who deserves praise. And there's a lot we need to say about this ayah, so please concentrate and follow. The first point is the style which has been used in this ayah, which what we say in Arabic is it's a style of hasr, exclusiveness, meaning the only reason why they punished them and tortured them was because they believed in Allah. That's the only reason. Now, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala state it? What's the point of saying this? We know this already. We know that the reason why they were tortured and killed is because they believed in Allah. But the ayah is emphasizing that the sole reason wasn't because, for example, they spread mutiny and treason and rebellion against the king or anything of the sort. The sole reason was because they believed in Allah. And what's the point of mentioning that? The scholars say at-ta'ajjub, wonder. Amazing that the only reason why they were killed is because they believed in Allah. As if to say, this is not a reason why you should kill somebody, because he simply believes in Allah. And that's the amazement. Just because they believed in Allah, they were killed. Now we might find that this is, obviously, for us this is something we are used to. You know, it's happened to the believers, it happens to the believers all the time, it's happening now, it happened in the past, and it will happen in the future. But here, so this is something Ibn al-Qayyim, he spoke about, and he mentioned that what happens is that when, sometimes what happens is when you become infatuated in rejecting the truth, sometimes you become so blinded in rejecting the truth that you end up committing heinous crimes and rejecting it to such a level, to the degree that it's as if you are rejecting something which is completely agreed upon by all of mankind that it is wrong. So, and he gives lots of examples in the Quran. He said, for example, take this ayah from Surah al-A'raf verse 82. And this is speaking about homosexuals. Now when Lut alayhi salam, he gave da'wah to the people that not to commit this heinous crime of homosexuality, what was the reply of the people of Lut? أخرجوهم من قريتكم إنهم أناس يتطهرون. They said, get them out of this town of ours. Why? They are people who like to purify themselves. Why? Because they are people who like to purify themselves. Hang on a minute. When was seeking purity a bad thing? This is the point. This is the point that this is very similar. Just like the king, he killed the people because they believed in Allah. And surely, why would that be a reason to kill Allah, to kill people? Because they believe in Allah. And likewise here, they became so infatuated with following their desires that they began to see purity as a bad thing. Now, people who look at this from an outside perspective, they might think, why on earth would they see seeking purity as a bad thing? But this is the point, when you become infatuated with following your desires and following misguidance, you become completely blinded to the extent that you begin rejecting what is seen to be as normal. And just like, for example, take 50 years ago in this country, how did they view homosexuality? It was seen as a terrible thing. You couldn't speak about it. Now you can't speak about it because if you speak against it, you're the one who's seen to be in the wrong. And that's what happens. Ittiba'ul shahawat, following your desires and your hawa, makes you completely reject what is absolutely clear. Other examples he gave with the people of shirk, the way they are with the people of tawheed, that they become infatuated with hating and rejecting the people of tawheed simply because they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Likewise the case with the people of bid'ah. The people of bid'ah, this is how they are with the people of sunnah. To the extent that, for example, and this is the classic example I always use, when we see that Allah's law has been violated, the sunnah of Rasulullah ﷺ hasn't been, is being completely rejected by people, people are silent. But when it comes to certain matters of bid'ah, this is when they speak out. For example, what? Let's take, for example, the issue of the Prophet ﷺ's birthday. I'm not here to discuss whether it's sunnah or bid'ah or not, but obviously there are people who say it's bid'ah. And so all of a sudden when people claim that it is bid'ah, people shout out and say, how can you say celebrating the Prophet ﷺ's birthday is bid'ah? How can you say seeking shafa'ah from the Prophet ﷺ is bid'ah? Or tawassul, seeking tawassul for the Prophet ﷺ even though he's passed away, how can you say it's bid'ah? And then they accuse the people of sunnah of all of these names and label them with Wahhabi and all of this, but they're completely ignorant of the fact that that the law of Allah is not being implemented. And the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam in totality is not being implemented in the society. Likewise, when it comes to, and he gives another example, the Mu'attila, the people who reject the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or make ta'weel or distort the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They kick up a great fuss when people affirm these attributes of Allah as they are. So if Allah says He rose upon the throne, then we just say we believe Allah, He rose over the throne. That's it, we believe in it. We don't go into the details how it happened or does it have a different meaning. We just accept it the way it is. It's a simple matter, it's a simple belief. Likewise the Rafidah. He gave another example, the Rafidah, the Shia. This is how they are when it comes to Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and they show their love for the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, in particular his companions. We just love the companions. After all, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, didn't he love Abu Bakr? Didn't he say Abu Bakr is the most beloved to me? Didn't he marry the daughter of Abu Bakr? Didn't he marry also the daughter of Umar ibn Khattab? Okay. Didn't he marry both of his daughters to Uthman ibn Affan? It's very clear, he had love for these companions. And so this attribute of niqmah, وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ, that they did not relent, they didn't have spite for the believers, except that they simply believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is what happens when you end up following your desires. You become so blinded that you end up rejecting what is so apparent and clear. Now, what is interesting to note, وَمَا نَقَمُوا مِنْهُمْ إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا. إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا is been mentioned in the present tense. So it didn't say they did not resent them or ill-treat them because they had believed in Allah. It says they did not ill-treat them and resent them except that they essentially were believing in Allah. It's in the present tense. And this is to indicate that their israr, their confirmation, and that they were always willing to accept, always willing to remain upon Islam. And this was the reason why the king ended up, killing these people, because he saw the resilience of these people and they were willing to always accept and remain upon the truth. I mean, it's easy to accept Islam today, brothers and sisters. It's easy to accept it. No one's, putting a gun in front of you, or. And if this happened to many of us today, maybe we wouldn't, say the word of truth, and maybe we'll just say, look, take the concession. It's a rukhsa. Okay, but these people, the virtue lies with the fact that they were always going to accept the truth. They were always going to speak the word of truth, even if it meant losing their lives. The next point, إِلَّا أَن يُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ الْعَزِيزِ الْحَمِيدِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions two names of His in this ayah. And remember, whenever we study the names and attributes of Allah in the Quran, we must realize that there is some important significance in the way Allah chooses specific names, meaning these names will always suit the context of the theme of the surah, of the ayah. Al-Aziz. Why Al-Aziz in this ayah? Aziz, the Almighty, the powerful and the strong. This is to indicate that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is capable of giving victory to the believers. Even though that these people were burnt alive, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Aziz, the Almighty, is fully capable of giving victory to the believers. Also, for intiqam, for essentially taking revenge on those people who had punished the believers. So He's Aziz. So this is a type of threat to the believers. But it's also consolement to the believers. It's a threat to the disbelievers, but it's a source of comfort for the believers to know that Allah, He is not weak, He is rather Aziz. So if He has allowed, and this is the point now, if He is the Aziz, if He is the all-powerful and the Almighty, why did He allow this to occur? Why did He allow this to occur? Because Allah, when He's Aziz, He's also Hakim, the all-wise. And therefore when He allows something to occur, it is for a wisdom. Likewise, the reason why the Palestinians are being occupied and the reason why Syria is going through the turmoil that it's going through, there is hikmah in the end of that of those events. Doesn't mean we accept it and we just allow it to occur. No, but we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of planners. And so this is to indicate that if Allah had willed, because He is the Aziz, if Allah had willed, He could have easily prevented it. He could have easily prevented it. So we shouldn't get confused and think, wait, isn't this a contradiction? He's saying He's the Aziz, but His believers have been tortured and abused and they've been, executed. No, He's the Aziz, meaning that He's so powerful that had He wanted to, He could have easily have stopped them. But He didn't. So Allah, He gives respite, but He doesn't ignore. Amhala walakin ma ahmala. He gave them respite, meaning He gave them time to do whatever they want. Walakin ma ahmala. But He did not ignore their actions. He's taking account. And sometimes Allah allows these jababira, these oppressors and these dictators to do what they do, so that their adhab on the day of judgment will be multiplied. Al-Hamid, Al-Aziz, Al-Hamid. Al-Hamid, the one who deserves all praise due to the perfection of His qualities and His names and attributes. And studying this quality, as Ibn Qayyim, he said, Alhamdu huwa a'ammul ma'arif wa awsa' al-ulum. That studying the praise of Allah is from the most extensive and the most deeper forms of knowledge that you can study. Why? Because when you study the hamd, the praise, and why Allah deserves praise, you are essentially studying the beautiful attributes of Allah and the perfection of His attributes. وَهُوَ مُتَضَمِّنٌ لِحِكْمَتِهِ فِي جَمِيعِ أَعْمَالِهِ. And studying the praise of Allah is essentially studying the wisdom behind all of His actions. Now, Al-Hamid means the one who deserves praise. So this is to reiterate that He is to be praised for His attributes and He is to be praised for His actions. Therefore, the fact that He allowed these believers to be executed in this manner, we should realize Allah is Hamid. He is to be praised for this. Because what will happen to the believers, those who are killed? What will happen to them? They're shuhada, they're martyrs. Allah will bestow His mercy and His grace upon these people. Isn't this a reason to be thankful to Allah? Isn't this a reason to... And look at that, subhanAllah, and the martyr as well. What is he called in the Arabic language? He's called Shaheed. Shaheed. Why is he called Shaheed? Shaheed means witness, he sees. Look at all of this, subhanAllah, revolves around this concept of... And one of the names of Allah, as we will see soon, inshallah, is Shaheed. The witnesser, the one who witnesses. The Shaheed is called the Shaheed, the martyr that is, because at the first spill of his blood, he sees his place in paradise straight away. Straight away, subhanAllah. Straight away. Another reason they say as well is because the angels, they are witnessing his martyrdom. They honor him so much that they witness his martyrdom. Also that he will be a witness for the believers on the day of judgment. He will be their witness. And it's usually the prophets that are the shuhada over their people. But the martyrs will hold such a position that they will be witnesses over the rest of creation, Yawm al-Qiyamah. And so many other reasons that the scholars mentioned. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is to be praised for the actions that He undertakes. So when the believer hears this, Al-Hamid, this therefore gives the believer a sense of hope. Gives the believer a sense of hope. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the Hamid, He is the one who deserves to be praised. That means we should seek our reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was one of the reasons why the people would worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is to seek the reward from the Hamid. And also at the same time, subhanAllah, Imam Shanqiti, he mentioned this, that this is also to give hope to those who did wrong. That although Allah is Al-Aziz, He is also Al-Hamid, the one who deserves praise. And therefore the one who deserves praise includes that He is just and He is fair. Therefore if the disbeliever wants to make tawbah, he can. And this is something we'll come back to later in the surah. Okay. And then Allah gives another attribute to Himself in verse number 9. الَّذِي لَهُ مُلْكُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاللَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. The one to whom belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Shaheed, a witness over all things. So He's mentioned now that He's Aziz, He is the Hamid, and to Him belongs the heavens and the earth. This is to re-emphasize this ta'ajjub, this amazement. Meaning they only believed in Allah, and who is Allah? The Aziz, the Hamid, the one to whom belongs the heavens and the earth. Amazement. And they to be killed for believing in this belief in Allah, the Great, the Almighty, the one to whom belongs everything. Wallahu ala kulli shay'in shaheed. And then Allah concludes, and Allah is a witness over all things. Now this is Allah as-Shaheed has been mentioned here as a warning, as a wa'id, as a threat. As a threat to the disbelievers, that Allah can see and He witnesses everything that these disbelievers, they do. Now the name of Allah as-Shaheed can be used in many different ways. Sometimes to console the believers, that Allah can see and He witnesses everything that takes place. But sometimes it's used as a warning. He's a witness to everything. Now, Ash-Shaheed is very similar to the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Al-Basir and Al-Alim, the all-seeing and the all-knowing. So what's the significance here? Why not and Allah can see everything or Allah knows everything? What's this specific feature of mentioning Ash-Shaheed here? Ash-Shaheed, one of the meanings of Shaheed is that someone who is present, Hadir. So someone who witnesses something and is present is not like someone who simply knows of something. For example, we know what's happening in Syria now. We know what's happening in Syria. We see it on the news. We see it on the internet. We see it on YouTube. But do you think you will view it the same way if you saw it with your own eyes and you were there standing in front of those people who are being killed? By Allah, you wouldn't. Your heart would be in a completely different state. And this is one of the problems of contemporary media, is that sometimes we see things so much, time and time again, that we become desensitized, isn't it? We become desensitized. And this is a problem. But once you're actually there, you're present, then you see it in a different light. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not just Alim in this case, and He just sees it from a distance. Rather, He's Shaheed. He's someone who was present. He was there. He knew exactly what was occurring. And that means this means that when a person is Shaheed, he's involved now in that matter. His heart is involved in that matter. He feels what has happened. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has love and affection for the believers. He doesn't just know what happens to them, He rather witnesses it. And this really gives consolement to the believer, subhanallah. To know that Allah simply doesn't just know what the believers are going through, but He witnesses it and He feels that care and affection for the believers. Wallahu ala kulli shay'in shaheed. This also has an effect on the believer to know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is ash-shaheed. One of the effects on the believer is that it leads to him having a sense of muhasabah, a sense of accounting himself. He accounts himself for all of his actions because he knows that Allah doesn't just see and knows, but He's witness to his deeds, to the believer and the disbeliever alike. I forgot to conclude what Ibn al-Qayyim, when he mentioned the point about the sole reason why these people were executed was because they believed in Allah. When he mentioned the analogies between the people of bid'ah and the people, the rafidah and the people of shirk, he said very interestingly at the end, كل هؤلاء لهم نصيب وفيهم شبه من أصحاب الأخدود وبينهم نسب قريب أو بعيد. That you'll find that all of these groups of people, the people of shirk, the people of bid'ah, the people of ta'atil, that negate Allah's attributes, the rafidah, you all find them having a similar quality to the people of the ditch. And what was that similar quality? Is that when they become blinded to the apparent truth, such that they see it as an anomaly, something which is extremely strange. Now this happens sometimes in this contemporary age. So just to go back again, I forgot to mention this, that sometimes you find that when certain issues arise, or certain fatwa are published, or certain principles are used within our religion, sometimes we might not agree with it because it goes against what we were always upon. And so what happens is we become so blinded to our stance, simply following our hamiyya, our vigor, and following our emotions, we can end up essentially abusing something which is completely accepted within this religion. Take for example, many of us when we were in our youth, we had this, this issue about, should we be following the scholars, or should we be following the mujahideen, or should we be following X, Y, Z? And so what ends up happening, we end up taking groups, and we end up aligning and saying, no, I'd rather follow the mujahideen, because they are people who act upon what they know. And there are other groups of people who say, no, we just follow the ulama and we will ignore everything that everyone else says. Subhanallah. Isn't knowledge a virtue? Isn't jihad a virtue? Why do we end up completely condemning the other side as if they are upon complete batil, falsehood? Take for the example, the issue of the lesser of two evils. You find people condemning the implementation of this principle to the extent that they completely condemn the principle as a whole. And they make fun of it. They'll make fun of this issue of the lesser of the two evils, or maslaha and mafsada. These are principles of the Sharia. Allah legislates rules according to these principles. And we make fun of it? This is a type of mockery of the religion. Subhanallah. So this is a warning, really, that we should be very, very careful that sometimes not to allow our emotions to override our thoughts. We need to be cool-headed at times so that we don't end up rejecting accepted principles within our religion. Moving on now, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says in verse 10, إن الذين فتنوا المؤمنين والمؤمنات ثم لم يتوبوا فلهم عذاب جهنم ولهم عذاب الحريق. Indeed, those who persecuted or they burnt alive the believers, the male and female believers, and then they do not turn back, then they shall have the punishment of the hellfire, and they shall have a burning punishment. The ayat now moves on to describing a generic principle. So far we have looked at the story of a particular incident, and now the surah is going to explain the principles that we can derive from it. So what are the principles we can derive? That those people who persecute the believing men and women, and then they don't turn back in repentance, then they will have two types of punishment. Adhab Jahannam, the punishment of the hellfire, and a burning punishment. And we'll speak about the difference soon. The first point we need to discuss though is this word, إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Those who fatanu, which comes from the word fatana. And fatana, as you know, there's a common word that we know is related to it, which is fitna, trial and tribulation. Now this term trial and tribulation has a root meaning of burning. Fitna has a root meaning of burning. And that's why a blacksmith or a goldsmith and blacksmith, both, in the Arabic language, they were called al-fattan. Why? What do they do to the iron ore and to the gold? They burn it. They put it in a furnace so as to result, in order to what? Purify the gold or the metal from the iron ore and from the unwanted substances. And this is what fitna does. A fitna, you go into a fire and essentially you come out either pure like gold or you come out like dirt. But that's what happens after you burn, gold in its original form. You're left with two piles, pure gold and of filth. And that's what fitna does. When you go for a trial, you either succeed or you come out as a failure. And that's the meaning of fitna. So إِنَّ الَّذِينَ فَتَنُوا الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That's why the scholars, they said, those, fatanu here means literally أحرقوا, to burn. Those who burnt the believers. Or you can understand it in the general context, which how many scholars understood it, like Imam Shafi'i and others, Abu Hayyan, that it means those who put the believers to trial, who persecute them. So those people who persecute the believing men and the believing women. Now here what is interesting to know is mu'minat has been mentioned alongside mu'mineen. Now when you mention mu'minun and mu'mineen by itself, this includes believing women as well. So if I said, Ya ayyuhal muslimun, O muslimun, O believers, that's inclusive of female believers. The mu'minat, the muslimat. Why have they been mentioned separately? To indicate that there are different types of harm, because you can harm the believing men, but you can also harm the believing women as well. And you can harm the believing women in different ways. And in the case of Ashab al-Ukhdud, they were harmed in the same way as the men were harmed, which is by, burning them in the ditch. But they are also harmed in other ways as well. Like what's happening today, how are they harmed? With the issue of hijab and niqab, and they're harming the believing women. This also applies to them as well. So to stress that the believing women should not be harmed as well. And in fact, we can say that believing women are harmed more easily than with the case of the believing men. Now what is interesting is the next word after that. ثُمَّ لَمْ يَتُوبُوا. Those who persecute the believing men and believing women, and then they do not turn in repentance. Now, to say then in Arabic, there are many ways of saying it. You can say fa. Now, thumma, we say in the Arabic language, conveys a meaning of tarahi, of a gap, of a delay. Like if I said, Ja'a Muhammad, thumma Ali, Muhammad came, thumma, then came Ali. And when we say this, do they come together? No, there was a gap between them. So Ali came first, then there was a gap. Muhammad came first, then there was a gap, then Ali came. If I said in the Arabic language, Ja'a Muhammad fa'ali, Muhammad came, fa'ali, that implies what? Immediate succession. Ta'qib. Now notice here in this ayah, Allah didn't use fa, He used thumma. So those who persecute the believing men and the believing women, and then they do not make tawbah, what does this imply? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving these people a chance to return back to Him. He doesn't take them suddenly. He doesn't take them in one go, baghdatan. No, rather He gives them a chance to repent. That's why Al-Hasan, whenever he used to read this ayah, he said, Unzuru ila rahmatillah, look at the mercy of Allah. Allah gives a chance for tawbah even to these criminals. And these are the worst of people upon this earth, subhanAllah. And what crime could be greater than burning people alive in their thousands? And all in the name of simply because they believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Despite that, Allah gives them a chance to make tawbah. Despite that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives them a chance to make tawbah. So this is a lesson therefore for the disbelieving nations that come after. And in particular to the Quraysh, when they're hearing this verse, because obviously what happened to Ashab al-Ukhdud, what happened to these kuffar? Did they accept Islam in the end? No. But Allah is saying to the Quraysh indirectly, you have a chance to make tawbah. Don't end up like these people. So there's hope even for the Quraysh, subhanAllah. There's hope even for them. So this really shows the peak of Allah's generosity and kindness and mercy even to those who disbelieve. And another lesson we can learn is that we should not despair from the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says they will have two types of punishment. عَذَابُ جَهَنَّمْ وَلَهُمْ عَذَابُ الْحَرِيقِ. Now one interpretation was the second punishment, which is al-hariq, refers to what we mentioned already. And what was that? That the disbelievers, when they ignited this fire, what happened to them? They also caught on fire. So they have adhab in this dunya by being punished by their own fire, as well as having the adhab of the akhirah. This may be really, it's not upheld by the majority of the scholars, and in all honesty, if that was the case, I think the order would have been reversed. They probably would have mentioned, it would have made more sense to mention that they would have the punishment of this life as well as having the punishment of the hereafter. So that's why the scholars, majority of the scholars were of the view that that they will have the the hellfire for their kufr, but they will have the burning fire for their actions. Because as we know, Jahannam is of various different levels. It's not all the same. There are certain levels which are worse than others, darakat and darajat. So adhab al-hariq is adhab which is muda'af. It is a double punishment. And that's why some scholars of the view that al-hariq is actually one of the names of the hellfire and a more intense meaning of the hellfire. Another view of the scholars was that adhab jahannam and adhab al-hariq, when they're mentioned together, they reflect the two different types of punishment in the hellfire. One punishment of hellfire is cold, and the other punishment in hellfire is hot. Az-zamharir. Az-zamharir is this cold blast that the hellfire emits, which is a form of adhab. And also you have the hot aspect of the hellfire, which we call the hariq. So either way, their punishment will be extreme. Their punishment will be doubled, and their punishment will be from all angles. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and actually some scholars indicated that perhaps this could be referring to the punishment of the grave, this ayah. Because in a hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, "Al-qabru hufratun min hufari jahannam," that the grave is a pit from the pits of hellfire. Aw rawdatun min riyadil jannah, or it's from the garden, or it is a garden from the gardens of paradise, as reported in Al-Bayhaqi and in other books of hadith. So perhaps adhab al-hariq is referring to the punishment in the grave. And there are other ayat in the Quran, like the ayat of Surah al-Ghafir, that perhaps also indicates the punishment of the grave. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He mentions the second generic principle that you learn from the story of the people of the ditch. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ لَهُمْ جَنَّاتٌ تَجْرِي مِنْ تَحْتِهَا الْأَنْهَارُ ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. Indeed, those who believe and do righteous deeds, then they shall have paradises underneath which rivers flow. That is the supreme success. Now, by agreement of scholars, we said this ayah is it's general, it's not just referring to the believers that were killed in that ditch. It refers to everyone. So that's a generic rule we learn from the story. Now this phrase, we're going to hear it time and time again from now on. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, those who believe and do righteous deeds. Now, what I want to focus on here is that we shouldn't view iman and actions as two separate things. This is a common misunderstanding based upon verses like this. That because Allah says those who believe and do righteous deeds, this implies that righteous deeds are different from iman. And to this we say no. Why? Because sometimes for example, if I was to give an example, if I was to say all the students in this class passed their exam, and so did Abdurrahman, for example, okay, does that mean that Abdurrahman is not from the students? No, he's still from the students. But why do I mention him separately? Maybe to emphasize that he passed. Maybe because he failed all of his other previous exams, or maybe he did really well as he usually did. Okay. And so here, the emphasis here is on amal al-salih. Indeed, those who believe, and in particular, they do one aspect of iman, which is what? Al-amal al-salih. And they do actions, then they shall have rivers, paradises underneath which rivers flow. And amal al-salihat, and salihat comes from the word saluha, which means to be good and also to fix and to repair. That's one of the root meanings of it as well. And this is because al-a'mal al-salihat tuslihu. Righteous deeds, they rectify your state of iman. So even though your actions are a part of iman, they also rectify your iman at the same time. They also rectify your iman at the same time. It's just like if for example, you view blood. Blood is a part of the human body. But blood, it repairs itself, isn't it? You don't sometimes need to add, foreign influence and external things. It influences it, it repairs itself. So that's how you should view righteous deeds. They're an integral part to your iman. So what would happen if you take away your blood? You wouldn't just, you won't have a means of healing yourself, but you would die. So likewise, when you take away your iman, your actions from your iman, you have no iman. لهم جنات تجري من تحتها الأنهار. They have gardens underneath which rivers flow. Now this is something that the scholars, they reflected over this, and they've made different understandings of how we understand this. We have paradises underneath which rivers flow. Now when we say underneath which rivers flow, does that mean therefore we do not see these rivers? Because they're underneath. Now the rivers in paradise are of different types. In most ahadith they mention there are 4 types of rivers in paradise. There's a river of water, غير آسن, which hasn't been corrupted. You have rivers of لبن لم يتغير طعمه, which of milk, which hasn't become, if you leave milk and you leave it for a long time, it becomes off. The rivers in paradise of milk, they do not become off. Al-khamar, which is لذة للشاربين, which is enjoyable for those who drink. And also from asal, musaffa, honey, which is pure. So these are the different types of rivers underneath, the different types of rivers in paradise. And they all reflect, subhanallah, different aspects. Amazing, subhanallah. Water is used for what? Quenching, first. Honey is mainly used for sweetness, and but also is a form of cure, isn't it? It's a shifa. Milk is used for nourishment, and wine is used for enjoyment. That's pure enjoyment there. Everything you need, you find within the rivers of paradise. And they all, where do they emanate from? We have rivers, they emanate from the ground, they can emanate from rocks and mountains. These rivers, they emanate from mountains of musk. SubhanAllah, imagine that. The purity there. Not only that, Rasulullah described these rivers as flowing without any banks. You need to have ahadith, you need to have, just like we looked at in the surah, ukhdud. Okay, these trenches, rivers needs to flow in that. In a hadith, Rasulullah mentions that the rivers flow without ukhdud. And I find that quite fascinating how these rivers are mentioned in this surah, which speaks about Ashab al-Ukhdud. And not only that, they flow in the direction whichever way the person wants it to flow. You can't do that with the rivers in this dunya unless you manually have to, alter the way the rivers flow. Okay, but that's amazing, subhanAllah, to think that they flow like this. So many scholars, they said, what does it mean? Underneath which rivers flow, does it mean that the earth is transparent and therefore you can see underneath? That's how some scholars viewed it. But then the question arises that there are different levels of paradise. Now, if there are different levels of paradise, and so you have one home which is in paradise, high above the other, then you have rivers flowing underneath that. What's upholding these rivers? Ajib, subhanAllah. So that's why some scholars said that this is from the ghaib we cannot fathom. We cannot understand. It will be a complete amazing reality which we cannot, reflect over. But the important thing here, this phrase is repeated time and time again. And I think it's something which we need to reflect upon. Rivers, and in particular the different types of rivers that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has for the believers. ذَلِكَ الْفَوْزُ الْكَبِيرُ. Now, al-fawz, we simply translate as success. But in particular, al-fawz, we say al-dhafar bil-matlub. It means attaining what you always wanted. Attaining what was matlub, something that you always wanted. It's not just succeeding. Sometimes you can succeed. Okay? You might, for example, pass an exam. Okay? Your GCSEs, your A-levels. You want to pass. Okay? But do you really, really want to pass as if this is part of your life, that your main ambition in life? You're only passing because you need to. So when that person passes, we don't call that fawz, because you're not happy at the end. You're not that delighted, are you? You just got it over and done and dusted. You can move on now in life. Al-fawz, though, is when you desire something so much, and that's when eventually you get it. This implies that the believer should set paradise as his goal in life. When you hear this word fawz, you finally achieved what you've always desired. That's the attitude of the believer. That's how his heart should be connected to the akhirah. And not only that, they say al-fawz is al-dhafru bil-matlub ma'a husul as-salama. It means that you've attained what you've desired for so long, but at the same time it gives a connotation of escaping harm and triumph at the same time. Ma'a husul as-salama, meaning you've achieved what you wanted to without being harmed in the way. Without being harmed in the way. Meaning it's a complete triumph. You haven't just managed to cross the line, limping. You've achieved it with flying colours. That is the true and supreme success. So really with this, we can make a conclusion that these last few ayat, we can see how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala restores justice in these ayat. He restores justice in this ayat, and that the whole question is finally resolved. Everything is finally resolved in the hereafter, not in this dunya. Not in this dunya. In this dunya, the believers were persecuted, but Allah, He restores pure justice in the akhirah. And that what has taken place on this earth is no more than just a single part of the story. What takes place on this earth is just a single part of the story, and the matter really remains unfinished here, but it will be concluded, everything will be concluded in the hereafter. And upon that, inshallah, we will conclude today's lesson, and hopefully we will finish the surah next week. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك ونتوب إليك.